Radio Retrofuture.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Radio Retrofuture number 53. Today I have a very special guest I wanted on for the show for quite a while, better known as Baron Celsius from Fahrenheit, Alexandre Adams from Canada. He is actually a far more successful YouTuber than I am, and he has a very similar show to mine, actually, except that he interviews the people on conventions that he frequents as his character, Baron Celsius from Fahrenheit. I had a lot of doctors on the show as of late.
That's why he's a baron. There were too many doctors.
Yeah, and professors. Don't forget the professors. So yeah, let's just start with you. Who are you, and what do people know you from?
I'm Alex, as you said. I'm basically just a guy who likes steampunk. I've been into it around 2011. Actually, I started making stuff the year before that, but I started doing events in 2011. Prior to that, I had been a LARPer, an avid LARPer for about 10 years. So I was making costumes and things like that for medieval LARPing. But I always liked steampunk, but I didn't know what to do with it. To me, costumes were for LARPing, and there were no steampunk LARPs. So I had been looking at the style like on cosplay sites and things like that for a couple of years, but I had no reason to do it. And at one point, one of my friends told me, hey, in the spring, I'm going to this event in Toronto that's about steampunk. I'm like, oh, I'm going to go with you. So now I have an excuse, and I spent the winter making a steampunk costume. And I really discovered like a community that I really loved, and the approach, the creative approach is something I really, it's not contrary to the LARPing, where the costume is like something you do because you need it for the actual thing you're going to do, which is LARPing. In steampunk, creating the thing, whether it's a costume or other things, is like the essence of the thing. And that's something that most people don't realize when they see the style. They see the goggles and the top hats and all that, and they don't realize that it's about making the stuff, not just wearing it.
That's interesting, because I recently made a video that I'm gonna publish next week about the difference between steampunkers and cosplayers. And one of the aspects I emphasized was the desire of steampunks to also tell a story. I think when I'm talking about cosplay, it's more about the fandom. Like, people are expressing their fondness for a genre or something very similar. I agree with you on the artistic, but also think the narrative aspect of it. But let's talk about your character, for example. Are there particular objects you made specifically for Baron von Celsius to explain his role as this person that's going around interviewing people?
The Baron, actually, I didn't create the Baron for the show. The Baron existed before, and he had kind of a very organic origin. The first thing that existed about the Baron was actually his name. And I had the name for a couple of years before I actually started even doing steampunk. I mentioned I was a LARPer, and I always carried in my car what I called my disaster bag, which was a spare costume in case I died. For a long time, I had this second character made out of costume parts that I had. It was basically a Renaissance-style aristocrat that would have been basically useless but very rich. The tricorn and the little coat that looked kind of like a French or English army coat when they did this ranged battle. And I wanted a name that was going to be easy to remember, and he came from a part of the fictional world that was very inspired by Germany. So I wanted a German name. So I went with, von Fahrenheit is going to be easy to remember by the players. I needed a first name, so I'm going to go with Celsius. And originally, it was actually Baron Celsius K von Fahrenheit, and the K obviously stood for Kelvin, but I thought it was too long, so I stopped using it. That was just a name that I never used because I never needed the character. I never actually died. And then I made the costume, and the costume itself was just like my basic idea of a steampunk costume. Originally, he didn't have goggles because I wanted to do steampunk without goggles to prove that it was possible. And I made this backpack, the cell, all these gadgets. And like a month before we went to the actual event I was mentioning earlier, I went to one of the very few steampunk LARPs that there were actually here in Montreal. Fortunately, it's stopped now, but it was a very, very political and social LARP inside a building, an old building, Masonic temple actually, that they rented. And I needed to like create a character for this costume, so decided to use this name because it was appropriate. It was just meant to be used that time. A couple weeks later, we're at the other event. One of the organizers tells me that I should really go and participate into the Mad Science Fair with my backpack, something I had not planned to do at all. So when I'm there, I need like explain what this is and kind of in character. So I recuperated the character and used him, and even used the explanation for the device that I had created for the LARP. There was a couple of jokes in there because in that LARP I couldn't actually like create objects that could be used in game without using the rules for the game. So I wanted to have my machine, but I didn't want it to be cheating. So I made up this story that it's basically a communication device, but I only had one, so it was useless. And people found that so funny that I decided to reuse it in the science fair, and now it's become part of the character. So it was never planned to be a character, and even less to be the character in a web show that was not even planned there then. But I noticed that in convention, people noticed the costume a lot. So, and I had been wanting to do a web show for a while. But I didn't know exactly what to do. I didn't think I had anything quite interesting enough to fill an entire show to say myself. But through steampunk, I met a lot of very interesting people. So I was like, they have something interesting to say. So I thought I would present these people to people who didn't have the chance to actually meet them. And that I would use the Baron as like the connecting part between the different episodes, because he would be there all the time and he would be what linked them together. And then I made up this kind of nebulous origin for him in the show, as where he comes from and things like that. But I never wanted the show to be too much about the Baron's narrative. He's basically like just an excuse to meet these people.
I've seen the equipment of the Baron, and it's high quality from what I can tell. So my question would be, where did you learn your skills?
A little bit of everything. The leatherworking comes from the LARPing. I wanted to make like bracers, pouches, armors, and things like that. So I'd been working with leather for a while. I knew like very, very, very basic electronics since I think the first battery-powered things I made, I was 12. So my father's always been a tinkerer, so to me it's always been normal to tinker with stuff.
Right.
As a kid, I always played with Lego. I still do. But it has nothing to do with my job. I never like followed any courses and anything like that. And the secret, most of my devices are actually very simple inside. Well, I wouldn't say simple, but based on simple principles.
Yeah.
You don't have to know much. I think the secret is making it look like it's very complex when it's not actually. And what I always tell people is like, just go with your strengths. And that's what I did. I'm useless with clothing. I'm completely useless. Like for the Baron, I had to change the buttons on the vest that I usually wear.
Right.
There was like about 20 buttons. It took me a week. I'm really, really useless with clothing. So I hide my clothing underneath things I'm good at, like gadgets and things like that. So I just went with what I was good at. So there's not much. And then you expand a little bit while you're doing it. You move a little slowly outside of your comfort zone.
So yeah, where to go from there? Yeah, let's go with the LARP angle for a bit. Like here in the Netherlands, the term LARP has kind of a stigma among steampunks. Is that something you have over there as well?
No, not with the communities I'm familiar with. I mean, you probably mean stigma that it's kind of the cheap costuming, or
I think that that's part of it, but there's a really big gap between the people who LARP, the people who do steampunk, the people who do reenactment. So they actually know very little about each other. What we understand under the umbrella of cosplay is like the anime and the Star Treks and the Star Wars fans that dress up. That's now only for the last few years really starting to come up here. Before that, it was a really niche thing, and we have like these fairs were really big where we come from. That's generally fantasy, but also steampunk, Middle Ages, pirates as well. Kind of like your Renaissance fair, except we don't use that term here. So we had like Elfia, which is huge, I think one of the largest in Europe, and Castlefest, which is also starting to become as large or larger than Elfia. And it has a lot of neo-paganism rituals, and all the other things I said. And only these past 3-4 years, it's now starting to mingle. That we see more stormtroopers and anime characters and that kind of stuff.
Over here, there's a lot of overlap between these communities. They are separate, but you go to, in Montreal, two of the biggest events are Comic-Con Montreal and another one, less, how would I say, more, I think it's completely non-profit, called Otakuthon.
I heard of it, yeah.
Both of these, you'll find they don't have exactly the same crowd, but you'll have obviously a lot of cosplayers there. You're going to have some steampunk. You're going to have some LARPers in LARPing gear. And like a lot of people, many LARPs will not organize LARPs on these weekends because they're going to lose players who are going to be dressed in anime characters.
I can imagine that here to be true.
And a lot of the people here in my community, at least in Steampunk Montreal, will dress in medieval gear and go to LARPing on different weekends that they're not in steampunk. And we have people that I met dressed as Doctor Who or Star Wars, and who later joined us in the steampunk community. So there's a lot of overlap, and most people, even though many will have their favorite thing in there, most people feel kindred to the other styles. We're basically all parts of one big subculture that has some overlapping
true as well. Yeah. But for example, it was at the Dutch Comic-Con over here, and it was really funny. We were like the only steampunk group, and every time people saw us, it was like it looks familiar, but from what franchise is it?
Yeah.
We got that question so often. It's like, no, it's original. It's original.
A lot of people ask. I often had tables with either Steampunk Montreal, Steampunk Ottawa, and even the Jules Verne Fantastical Society in Halifax. And also we gave panels in events like from the Maritimes to Toronto. And a lot of the times people who are not familiar with it are like, okay, is that from Doctor Who? Is that from League of Extraordinary Gentlemen? Or things like that. And then you explain to them that it's actually original. But sometimes it's not. Like you may have seen my show, at some point I met steampunk stormtroopers. They were clearly scout troopers. They were unmistakably Star Wars characters, but unmistakably steampunk. So people are just not used to it, but most of the time people are fascinated by this idea of creating your own character.
Yeah.
So I've met some people who find that it must be hard because they can reproduce an anime or video game characters perfectly with their cosplay, but they would tell me, like, inventing the character, I would not know where to start. And for me, it's the opposite, because I find it much easier to create my own thing than to try to reproduce something that's already determined, because if it doesn't work, it can become something else.
Yeah, exactly.
So a lot of the things that I made were not supposed to look like that when I started them.
No, my developing process is very similar, yes.
I often say that when something breaks, it's not a problem, it's an opportunity. You can fix it into something different. And I've seen that happen to me a lot. And you can't do that with like cosplaying. If you're trying to be Link, you need to look like Link. And that the thing also that I think is fun with making steampunk is that it's not hard to start because you decide what it is. Uh, I often say that if you show up to a convention and only have you want to be dressed as Samus from Metroid and you only have one arm, you're gonna look stupid.
Yeah.
But if you only have 20% of your steampunk costume done, you can already look cool. It's gonna be a simple costume, but it people can't tell that it's not done. And the next time you wear a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and a little bit more, and
Exactly.
it evolves, and you decide when it's done. I
Yeah,
have a costume I've been wearing for 5 years. I explicitly add something every time I wear it, and I've been wearing it for I think, yeah, 5 years. It's getting a bit heavy.
Yeah, I know what it's like. And it was funny because I got a questionnaire by some guy, and I posted a video this week where I answer him. And often they ask this question to cosplayers, like, how many hours did you spend on your costume? And I was there with a friend, and they asked it to us in front of a camera. It was like, yeah, how many hours? And my friend was like, yeah, about 200, give or take. You know,
Actually, usually I tell people you don't count that. First of all, because that might make you very sad. And
yes, it would.
second, because it's hard to count. Usually, I have a bunch of projects at the same time. When you get stuck on one, you start working on the other. And I can work on 2, 3 things in the same evening. When I'm working on something, I'm kind of stuck. I turn around, I see the other project. Hey, I could do this. And then I just switch projects. So it's hard to know how much time you spent on each. And sometimes you're done, and then a couple months later, you're like, hey, I just found this nice piece at the flea market. Maybe I could add it to it. So it's hard to count. And when you do it for fun, it doesn't matter the time you spend on it.
No, it doesn't.
It's not work. It shouldn't be. It's basically you spend a lot more time making it than wearing it. So it has to be fun.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about your show. How did that come about? Like, when was the moment you decided, yeah, I'm gonna take a camera with me and start asking questions to people?
Well, I had been a big fan of internet movie reviews and all that, Channel Awesome and
Yeah.
the Nostalgia Critic, the Spoony One, and all these guys for a couple of years. And I kind of had this dream of making one myself, not expecting to go nowhere as big as they were, but just for the fun of it. And like I said before, the idea came of me realizing that I knew a lot of interesting people. And at first, it was supposed to be basically just like the people I knew. If you look at the very first episodes, like the first 4 or 5, they're basically just people I had already met, or just event I happened to go to. And it quickly became much bigger than I thought, not in terms of audience, but in terms of what I could do. I mean, my very first thing I did was film a pilot episode. I just interviewed one of my friends, a fellow steampunk, just to see what I could make. And it was not very good. When I rewatched it a couple of years after starting the show, and I couldn't get through it. I was embarrassed. And it's not because of my friends. Because of the quality of the job I did, like in post-production and all that. But I made a lot of mistakes on that one. And I sent it to about 50 people who knew something about filming, people who knew nothing about it, even a couple of actual internet producers that I had met or had contact with. And I took all their comments, and then I almost dropped the whole project because I compiled the whole thing and I had like, I don't know, 30 things that people didn't like. But after thinking about it a while, I realized that the vast majority of these things only... Whoop. Are you still getting me?
I hear you. I had a bit of lag there as well.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, it seems better now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I realized that the vast majority of these things, only one person had complained about it. So, 49 of these people thought it was okay. So, but there were things that 5 or 10 people said, like, you need to put background music, you need to shorten this, you need to. And so I redid it. It took me, I think there was like 7 months between my pilot and my first episode.
Mm-hmm.
And I filmed, like, I think 4 episodes before starting to publish. And then I just went with it. And at first, I was not supposed to do anything in convention. It was really supposed to be me going to people's home or their workshop or things like that. But then I ended up having opportunities with bigger names that I was coming across in conventions, and it became a lot more common. But it's also a lot more intense because you really have to do it when you can do it. When I did the interview with Robert Brown of Abney Park, and I won't go in length about that because it's all in the vlog at the end of the episode. I had him for 10 minutes. So I had to do the whole thing in 10 minutes. And at that point, I usually took about 45 minutes to film an episode. So that was really intense. And when you do like 2 or 3 of these in a weekend, that's basically all you do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I'm slowing down a little bit on the convention ones because I want to have the time to actually enjoy the convention. But when you get an opportunity like that, you kind of have to take it.
Yeah, well, it's one of the reasons why I enjoy doing it through this, because then people can do it whenever it suits them. You can take all the time you want, and they often have, there are benefits of doing it this way, but I understand that people are like, oh, you shut it on the convention. But like you said, you cannot enjoy the convention anymore.
Usually, the ones that are really time-consuming in conventions, they're usually not the ones with the big names where you spend, like I said, like less than an hour with them. Because these, anyway, you have to arrange these in advance with the convention people. They will put it on their schedule and on yours if you have one. So it's a lot of stress. It's very intense, but it doesn't take that much time. It's the ones where I cover an entire convention by interviewing like 7 or 8 people for very short bits. You have to find these people, you have to set up, you have to do the whole thing. And filming on location is a lot more work because you have to deal with sound, lighting. You can't bring your whole stuff.
Yeah.
When you're like in somebody's living room or workshop, you just set up the whole thing. You take maybe 15, 20 minutes to set up all the lights, the sound, and all that. And then you just go, and it goes really fast after that.
Yeah.
But when you film 10 minutes with 8 people, you set up for 20 minutes 8 times. So that can be very time consuming. But it's still a lot of fun. You get to meet a lot of people. And that's why I experimented with the costume montages that I also do on my channel, because the interviews I did with a bunch of people during a convention I was trying to communicate the feel of that convention. So I would pick a sampling of people and interview them. And I think it works, but like I said, it's very, very time consuming. And you still have just a very small subset of the people in the convention. While the costume montages, you explore people a little less, but you get a wide selection. And anyway, if you're in a convention, and you're probably going to want to take pictures of these cool costumes, but I find that actually filming them is a lot more rewarding.
Yeah.
Because when you come to someone and say, I want to take a picture of you, they have their pose or 1 or 2 pose. They do the pose, you click, and bye. They're used to it. But when you get to them and you're like, I want to film like 4 seconds of you doing something cool. And they're like, okay, what do I do? So I'd say about 10% know what to do when you do that. And most have to think about it. And a lot of them, you have to actually direct them. Basically, as a filming director. Say, okay, I have an idea. You can do this, you can do this like that. And you do a couple of takes. So you actually have more of a contact with the person.
Yeah,
and
you do.
It's still part of the fun of the convention. So that's something I like. And I might do it again in the future. I've not been doing many conventions in the past year or so, Too many other projects actually. So, but I mean to go back at some point and do a little more of these. I had a lot of fun doing the one with Professor Elemental, with him actually singing
Yeah, I
for
saw that
the.
one.
We had a lot of fun doing that.
I can imagine. What do you have in store for your channel in the future? What are the things you'd like to do more of or have planned? Or...
Oof. It's a bit hard to say right now. I already have one episode filmed, and I have precise plans for at least the two following ones. They might actually not come out in the order. I think I'm presently the channel is on a bit of a hiatus. Uh, First of all, like I said, because I have a lot of other events I've been asked in festivals and things like that. Mostly because my editing computer died on me, so I have to rebuild the whole thing. So, but I think I needed a break anyway. I really don't know. I don't plan too much ahead. I actually did the mistake of planning too far ahead at one point, and I had, for the longest time, I was a year behind on editing my videos. I would most of the videos would come out like 2 weeks before the event where I filmed them came again. So well, at one point, once you're over like 8 or 9 months, you're like, I might as well wait for the event to come again. That's going to create a hype for the video. So like everything I filmed, like the ones I was talking about, Professor Elemental, Amney Park, Steam Powered Giraffe, these are all things I filmed at the Grand Canadian Steampunk Exposition, and I published most of these in the month preceding the following year's exposition. So because I had so many, I was so afraid at first of having no occasion to film for a while and having no video to put out, that I filmed a lot in advance, and then I went to some conventions where I filmed like 3 or 4 videos in the same weekend, and I usually put out videos at best every 6 weeks, and more often every 2 months. So that was like 8 months worth of videos filmed in a single weekend. So I realized that I was filming too far ahead. So
Right,
I decided to slow down on the filming, put a little bit more time on the editing. But yeah, I don't plan too far ahead. I'm doing this just for fun. And I realized that if it was too planned, I kind of felt obligated to do it, and then it was less fun. So I'm doing it as I go, and actually purposefully decided not to monetize anything about the channel because I don't want it to become a job. In the past, I've been involved in things that I really love doing, and that became a second job to me.
Right.
And then I stopped enjoying them.
Yeah.
So I just there's no long-term plans. Just but like I said, when I started the idea of doing an interview with Amney Park or Professor Elemental or Steam Powered Giraffe or Doug Walker was ludicrous. I never imagined. I was like, it would be fun if in many years it became really big and I had these opportunities. And I did a lot of these in the first year after I started filming. Like I said, it took 2 years before they were out, and I was like, that's incredible. And just doing that is so much fun. So if I have other opportunities like that, I'm probably going to take them.
All right. Well, we talked quite a while now. Are there any other things you want to talk about, ask me, or want to present to the audience?
I don't know. Maybe one thing. Do you have a problem if I plug something?
No, sure. Go ahead.
No. Because a couple of my friends are doing something really cool right now. We have a steampunk band here in Quebec that their songs are in French, and they have this really weird universe. It's a rock opera, so it's kind of mad.
Jardin Mécanique, by any chance?
Yeah, Jardin Mécanique. It's really nuts what they're doing, and right now they're actually running a campaign, a crowdfunding campaign they want to make a comic book, a graphic novel actually, of their origin stories. And I've seen what this artist did with the Turbo Kid comic book, and it's insane. and the comic book the graphic novel is going to be both in French and English. So it's the first time that the English-speaking public will be able to really understand their story. I really invite, I advise anyone who likes anything about steampunk to discover this group, this band, and it's especially now it's a good chance to discover them, even if you don't speak French. So people should check that out. That's a pretty cool thing that they're doing.
Yeah, I suggest we go to the traditional words of inspiration we have at the end of every episode. So is there any message you want to give to the fans as they watch?
Like I said before, the advice I always tell people who don't know how to start with steampunk is to go with their strength. But I think most of your viewers are probably already into steampunk. So I guess the main thing is just to have fun with it. And also realize that you can apply the steampunk idea to more things than steampunk. As I'll often say, our grandfathers and grandmothers build their houses, their furniture, make their own clothing. That's something we kind of lost. And we're not dumber than these people. So obviously everything is going to try to convince us that we can't make these things ourselves. That way they can sell them to us. And yeah, you can't invent the next iPhone in your garage now. We're not it's not the Tesla days anymore. But still, we can reappropriate a lot of things and either personalize things, make them unique, or even sometimes before buying something, you should maybe ask, can I just make it? And that's a question, and often the answer is going to be no, I can't make that. I can't make my own TV. But like a bookcase or a table, sometimes it might be even cooler if you make it yourself. So it's worth at least asking that question, I think.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this episode with Baron Celsius from Fahrenheit. Almost said doctor again. Darn you, Modius. Anyway, so yes, if you enjoyed this episode, please like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. And please share it on your social media so everyone can enjoy this content as well. People, with that, I'm just gonna bid you adieu.
Do it all once more. Watch me. I'm going to show you the next two parts right here. Once the basic steps are down, the rest is easier still.